It's time for some straight talk. The big wireless companies charge a boatload for their superior network coverage. But guess what? Straight Talk uses the same cell towers but charges a lot less. Who knew? Well, now you do. And I do. So let's do something. It's time to switch to Straight Talk. Unlimited plans start as low as $35 a month on America's largest, most dependable networks. Straight Talk Wireless. Only at Walmart.
Savings may vary. A month equals 30 days. Please refer always to the latest terms and conditions of service at straighttalk.com.
Glad you're with us here. Phil, there's a lot to get into here. You tell me, guest choice. Where do you want to start with the game last night, or do you want to start with the ongoing story of the Cleveland Browns? You pick.
Well, I think so. I certainly heard you guys talking at length about the game already so far today from last night. So maybe the Browns. I think this is a fascinating story that a team I think there's sort of a fun segment to be had here.
Yeah.
Things that lasted longer than the Browns GM vacancy. Like I tweeted this yesterday. Frank Gore was an Eagle for longer than the Browns GM job was vacant. For those who don't remember, Frank Gore a few years ago during the institution of the legal tampering period agreed to a deal with Philadelphia. Of course, nothing is final until it's signed. He subsequently backed out of that deal to go join the Colts. Bringing the band back together with Chuck Pagano and also Andre Johnson. In retrospect, I think Frank might have chosen the Eagles if he had the opportunity to do a mulligan. But the number, it was. People are asking me, and when that move takes place yesterday, a lot of requests for radio and television and other commitments. Right. Why now? And I'm thinking to myself, sometimes you got to apply common sense. And I know that common sense is not always common, but you got to apply common sense. When a team makes a GM switch on Thursday, December 7th, when they're already 0-12, what is the difference between now and January 1, the day after regular season?
To beat the Giants, right? Isn't that it?
Beat the Giants, or somebody else to the punch for a candidate. And, the idea that John Dorsey, less than 11 hours after the Browns announced their firing, would be announced as their new GM. And this has nothing to do with John himself. He's the person just being hired. But, it's incredible to think that a team could go through some of the requisite holes that you have to, or hoops you have to go through in order to satisfy or to successfully hire a GM. Of course, one thing that's like the elephant in the room is the Rooney Rule. Now, evidently the Browns satisfied the Rooney Rule. It may have taken place, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, it sounds like this GM search has been going on in earnest for a while. But you can say, is that fair to Sashi Brown, who was fired yesterday? Whether that Rooney Rule was satisfied by an interview yesterday between 9:50 a.m. and 8 o'clock p.m., or it was satisfied previously, I don't know. But the process right here, I think, took a hit yesterday based off the optics of everything that went down.
Well, they're going to have to explain that. And I guess the question would be, people may still raise an eyebrow if it was within the 11 hours of Sashi Brown not having a job. But what if it was before that? What if it was while Sashi still had a job and they were interviewing potential new GMs?
And I wonder if, if we were to find out that the Browns interviewed a Rooney Rule candidate prior to Sashi Brown being dismissed, if they would say, well, actually, Sashi Brown was our VP of football operations. He wasn't our general manager. So we were conducting an interview for a position that, in theory, was already open for us. I just think at the end of the day, we have this massive, significant importance surrounding the Rooney Rule and the need for minority candidates to get their fair due. And there are times where it feels like it's nothing more than a placeholder in the process.
A box to check as you go to what you really want to do.
Do we do that? Yeah, we got that. And I get it. There are some deals that are done before they're even over, right? I mean, before the previous season is even over. There will be that way during the next coaching cycle, which will take place in January 1. At the same time, let's give a little bit of respect to the Rooney Rule. If it's going to be, I almost think that, you should just get rid of it if you're going to ignore it, like some teams seemingly have,
or use it so arbitrarily.
Yeah, exactly. If there are times where I think to myself, is it accomplishing what it aimed to accomplish?
And that obviously is taking away from the hiring of John Dorsey, and that's a separate sort of compartment to the story, because you could make a very compelling argument that John Dorsey is the best candidate out there.
Sure,
right?
I mean, this is a guy that helped Kansas City. They were in the playoffs last year. They could be on their way to the playoffs this year. Obviously, things have tumbled of late, but I mean, if they win this year, if they make the playoffs this year, 90% of that roster is something, the tentacles of John Dorsey are involved with it. And, I mentioned this yesterday on Twitter, is that a lot of times when you're switching positions of, top lieutenants, you often go from whether it's, hey, you fire an offensive-minded head coach, you go to a defensive-minded head coach.
Right.
You often swing to the other side of the spectrum. And for the Browns, for lack of a better term, Sashi Brown represented the analytics movement. John Dorsey is a scout. People are like, what does that mean? Like, he's the kind of guy that, like, there's probably nothing that John Dorsey enjoys more than, like, getting in a car in some remote part of the country and going and unearthing some small school prospect that winds up being a 10-year player in this league.
A Kareem Hunt.
Exactly. That no one else was thinking of. That's what he loves, that process. He loves the process of churning through the roster top to bottom. And the Browns have, they thought outside of the box a little bit with the Paul DePodesta hire and promoting Sashi Brown. We'll see what DePodesta's role, if there is one going forward, is. But they have found someone who is going to be worried first and foremost about finding good players in John Dorsey.
Yeah, I don't think that the way they were going, they're going that way anymore, and they gave up on that, it seems, pretty quickly. So you talked about Dorsey likes to go to the smaller areas and find those gems. Well, I think the Browns are going to want him to go to a big area and find a big-time quarterback. Any doubt in your mind that is exactly where they're going to go?
I have no doubt in my mind, and this is such a ridiculous statement to make on December 8th when we're, 4 months away, 4.5 months from Trey and the gang. And I know you guys are going to the draft this year.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll all be there.
So Trey's going to be working for 30 hours that day. But it's such a ridiculous statement to make on December 8th. But I have no doubt in my mind that the Browns will take a quarterback with their first pick in this year's draft.
And that leads us to a bigger question, actually, because, look, it's been depressing for the Cleveland Browns, essentially, except for 1 year, since they came back into the league in 1999, the 1 year they made the playoffs with Kelly Holcomb as their quarterback.
Oh, yeah.
It's not that bad of a situation if you look at what the tools they have to work with. The question or the problem has always been executing the right use of those tools. Right. But they have an extra first-round pick. Again, I think they have 2 extra second-round picks. I think they have 6 more bonus picks. They got a ton of cap space. As you alluded to, it is a quarterback-rich draft. If you're John Dorsey, who has a track record of doing this other places, as bad as it's been for Cleveland, and it's been bad, there might be real optimism that someone who has a resume like Dorsey can actually make it work.
No doubt about it. And every time something notable happens with the Browns, I have a good friend, longtime friend of mine, Dan in Cleveland, and he calls me. He needs, it's like,
Dan in Cleveland, hello,
Dan,
you're on.
You're on the air, Dan. It's like cathartic for him to talk through some of these moves. And what I told you, we're talking about it yesterday, and I'm like, at the end of the day, as bad as it's been and as bad as it looks right now, if they get a quarterback, which I know is a 50-year if it feels like for the Browns, but there are times where teams stumble into a quarterback or a quarterback look at the Texans. Do you think they understood what they had in Deshaun Watson when they drafted him?
Well, they did trade up to get him. Did trade up to get him.
And then they didn't start him at the beginning of the season.
That's
so
a separate
at the end
issue.
of the day, at the end of the day, there is some credence to the idea that you can stumble into a quarterback and it can be a stroke of genius. I'm not taking away from what the Texans did or Deshaun. Right. But he exceeded expectations. For the Browns, if they get a quarterback that is a legit, surefire starting quarterback, whether it's Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, whoever you think it might be from this class, all of a sudden this entire roster takes on a much different shape. You're thinking to yourself, wow, not only do we have a quarterback, we got Josh Gordon, we got Corey Coleman, we got David Njoku, we've got a pair of running backs who are pretty decent, we got a good offensive line. Defensively, we've got a good front seven. All of a sudden you start to highlight those guys. But for now, it's yeah, we have, a couple pieces on defense, a couple pieces on offense, and a bunch of draft picks.
Let me tell you, Cleveland fans won't do that because they're too used to being burned.
Correct.
So they're not going to have any positive feeling until they actually see W's on the field. I mean, and I understand
it.
And I do. I do understand that for how many times they've been burned with this.
Yeah, look, it's unfortunate, and we've said it a million times. They are a very loyal, although this year it seems like they're staying away more than ever before, but they are a loyal fan base that deserves a lot more. Golic and Wingo on ESPN Radio and ESPN2. We're talking to ESPN insider, NFL insider Field Yates, who co-hosts the Fantasy Football podcast, and of course it's playoff time. So we'll see what happens going forward. And again, John Dorsey's press conference will be later on today, and I'm sure they'll have some of that on NFL Live, and they can get into that there. But then there's the issue of what happened last night. How wide open right now do you see the NFC South? Because the way it stacks up right now, if the Saints had won that game, the Falcons were pretty much out of it.
Yep.
But now, because of who's left on their schedule, if Atlanta wins out, and we're not suggesting that will be easy in any way, shape, or form, but if they win out, they win the division. They control their own destiny.
They do. I believe.
If you believe destiny is something that can be controlled.
I knew you were coming back with a caveat there. I think both them and New Orleans can say that, right? If not, maybe all three teams can say that if they win out, they win this division. It is wide open. And the weird part about Atlanta is I keep thinking to myself, every time a Falcons game gets started, I keep thinking to myself, I still look at the ingredients on offense, and I'm like, look, they can hang with anybody in a given week offensively. And they go out last night, they win in spite of their offense, not because of their offense.
And they lost the last week because the offense wasn't there.
Exactly.
They only scored 9 points against
Minnesota. So, Matt Ryan, it's got to get better. And that's such an oversimplified statement. But the kind of unforced errors he made last night, that's not. So, before I get too excited about Atlanta, like the quarterback, the MVP of last year's league, and by far the best player in football during the regular season last year, needs to straighten some things out. But they breathe some life into their playoff hopes, and I believe they have one more home game next weekend before they go on the road for 2 to finish up the season. So Atlanta still has a pulse here, and after last week's 14-9 loss to the Minnesota Vikings, I might have thought differently.
Right.
They're in the mix.
All right, well, so let's look at the NFC here because essentially you have 3 teams that can possibly come out of the NFC South.
Yep.
Philadelphia's at 10-2. Is it possible for the Dallas Cowboys to make the playoffs? Yeah, but not likely. It's 6-6.
2% chance.
The Vikings are 10-2. Is it possible for the Packers or Lions to make the playoffs? Yeah, but not likely.
Right.
Okay, so then it becomes down to this. Really, are we going to get 3 teams out of the NFC South, or are we going to get 2 out of the South and 2 out of the West with the Rams and the Seahawks? And again, remember, it's important, as much as we all love the Rams, and nobody loves them like our own Louis Riddick.
That's right.
Who's been all in since day one. Despite the fact that the Rams are 9-3 and the Seahawks are 8-4, one of those 3 losses is to Seattle in Los Angeles, and they still have to go, the Rams do, to Seattle. So when it's all said and done, it could be Seattle somehow, some way winning that division if they can get a tied record with the Rams. So do we believe that it's more likely to get 3 out of the South, or 2 out of the South and 2 out of the West?
I think 2 out of each division.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, just noting that Atlanta, yes, they do sort of control their own fate going forward, but how do I have confidence in them winning 4 straight games after the up and down play that we've seen from them throughout this season? I think ultimately, and I don't want to say that too many games in Week 14 are must win, but like both for Philadelphia and LA, this Sunday's game is massive implications. Like it could be the difference between Philadelphia playing at home
or being the 3.
Exactly.
Right.
Home field advantage throughout the playoffs, the number 2 seed, at least having a bye week, or the 3. For LA, like it could make a big difference in them potentially making the playoffs period, because as Trey mentioned, they already lost to Seattle once. They have to travel to Seattle, which I believe is next weekend. I think it's going to be 2 teams from each division. I just think the attrition in the NFC South, like someone, they're going to sort of cannibalize each other, and one team will, it'll be over the next 3 weeks. Atlanta will beat Carolina, or Atlanta will beat New Orleans again, and Carolina will beat New Orleans, whatever it is. Like it'll work itself out to the point that Seattle and LA probably both get at least 11 wins, and they probably both emerge into the playoffs this year.
Well, New Orleans still obviously controls their own destiny, still leading that division, even with the loss last night. A loss Drew Brees basically blames on it being a Thursday night. Yeah. So you heard we played his rant. We'll do it again. Yeah. Says 100% the reason because it's Thursday night. He gave the wrong stat that said there are more injuries on Thursday. There aren't on Thursdays than Sundays. What are your thoughts on every Friday we have this discussion of people and players that complain about playing on Thursdays?
I totally get I can first of all, I can understand where players come from, because they probably think to themselves, like, after a short week, like like what do you attribute this to? Like, hey, last night we had an atypical number of injuries, 6 in the first half, I believe it was. What was different about last night than every other week that we play? And the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh, we're playing on Thursday. That's different. At the same time, like you noted, there is not empirical evidence that shows that you are more prone or more likely to get injured on Thursday night when playing a game versus on Sunday when playing a game. And I think this goes back to, I want to say it was Richie Incognito for the Bills who was really disappointed in the game.
That was after the loss to the Jets, yeah.
And the point was, like, notice how no Jets players were complaining about Thursday. Jets players were saying, we got 3 extra days off.
Well, not only that, but that was the game where the Jets did all the dancing on the field.
Right.
So that became an internet sensation for about a week and a half, and that's when everyone was happy with the Jets. And then, of course, they've turned into doing more Jets things. But you're right.
Right.
Perspective is a wonderful thing.
It
right?
sure is.
If the Saints had somehow found a way to win that game and not throw an interception late in the end zone with all those injuries, boy, it's good now. We got time to heal up after these 3 games and get ready for this stretch run. This could be a bonus for us.
Yeah, and if we get to the point where there is decided evidence that shows that the shorter week lends to more injuries, then in a league where the unquestioned, when Roger Goodell's extension was signed a couple of days ago, we were asked, what should his number 1 priority be? And it's the same one should always be. The health and safety of his players. And if we have evidence that shows that Thursday games leave players more prone or more susceptible to injuries, whether it's head or otherwise, then we need to do something about it. Now, maybe that will never happen because there's so much money invested in the television side of it. But for now, like, we're going to have this sentiment probably every late Thursday night, early Friday morning, and mostly from the team that lost, but maybe on occasion from the team that won as well. And listen, it's a bummer for New Orleans that they lost massive key pieces last night. You know, like Alvin Kamara hasn't been maybe just the best rookie this season.
Right.
Like, he has a legit case for the offensive player of the year.
He's been phenomenal
this year. And they were without him for all but about 5 plays last night.
Yeah, listen, they abandoned their running game, basically. They only ran 15 times because Ingram had the toe coming into the game, and then he had to carry the load. I guess that's my point of the whole thing, because I don't want to rant and rave and scream, but there's a lot of tweets to go against this, that we're going to still have this discussion. If you show me the data that can say, boy, this is so bad for the players, I am certainly willing to listen. I haven't seen it just yet.
Yeah.
All I know is when I played on a couple of Thanksgivings, it is a short week. It is a tough week. You don't put pads on. Like in this case, it's a division game, and I played the Cowboys in Philly, the division game. Now, when I was at the Dolphins, we played the Cowboys. It wasn't, so there's a little more into a game plan.
Was that the Leon Lett game?
Yes, it was. It was a Leon Lett game, yes.
So,
yes, it's more difficult, but yeah, you don't put on pads, and then you have 10 days afterward on the other side of that. So I'm open to show me why it's so bad. You know, I just don't want to hear from the losing team of why it's bad and this is the reason we lost. Show me a little more of that, and I'll certainly am willing to listen.
And I would say this: I'm not trying to take anybody off the hook or put somebody on the hook here. But imagine, like, from the league standpoint, like, imagine the sort of, I guess the conflicting emotions the league might feel when thinking about Thursday Night Football. Like, when we get to, like, I'm already sort of sick to my stomach thinking about not having a bunch of college football games on tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? It's the first Saturday without a full college football slate, and I'm already like, you kidding me? Like, no, like, I need something. I need to kind of wet the beak. If we didn't have Thursday Night Football, everybody would talk about, like, man, I really miss Thursday Night Football. So the league is probably thinking to itself, like, it's a massive, massive business opportunity. It is not the only thing people are watching on Thursdays, but it is the thing that people are watching and talking about on Thursday night going into the game, and then on Friday morning after the game. At the same time, you get players that are decrying the merits of Thursday Night Football, including, Drew Brees is not just, listen, all players are important, but, like, Drew Brees is one of the faces of the NFL.
Without question. Walks into the Hall of Fame, sure.
Yeah, and certainly one of the most outspoken members that also has significant ties to the Players Association, the union. So, like, yeah, it's. I'm not saying it's. I don't have, like, great sympathy for the league in this regard, but, like, it's difficult. I'm sure there's part of them that is like, listen, if we found evidence, like, it will be really hard for us to keep trotting games out there on Thursday.
I agree with that.
At the same time, it's a business opportunity that's really difficult to ignore.
All right, Phil, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you this because people may not know that before you became an insider, you actually worked with the Patriots.
Yeah.
Right? And you were a scout?
Worked in the scouting department for the Patriots and the Chiefs. Yep.
Okay. So a lot of talk has been made, obviously, of the Rob Gronkowski hit on Tre'Davious White and Tre'Davious White's response and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty clear right after the game that Bill Belichick knew something was coming.
Yep.
And when it was the little conversation that was caught on camera between Bill's head coach Sean McDermott and Bill Belichick. Just so people understand, how do you think Bill would have addressed that, not only with Gronk, but with his team and going forward and the things he would have said?
Yeah, I think that I don't know that Bill will probably would be as direct as, like, hey, guys, like, here's the play, here's what we can't do, Rob, like, this was moronic. But I think that Bill will use sort of that as a jumping off point to say, like, guys, we can't afford self-inflicted wounds. We just can't. Like, you score a touchdown, you get a celebration penalty for whatever, doing something.
Right.
Like, negative plays. Like, there's too little margin for error in the NFL. Too many teams are too good. There's too much parity. They're like, you think you're so much better than these? You think you're going to just walk into Miami on Monday and beat a team that you beat 35-17 2 weeks ago with their only, meaningful touchdown coming when Tom Brady had the football snapped when he wasn't even looking. Like, I think he's going to use it as much. Listen, and I also say this is, like, obviously it was a despicable moment and an action by Gronk, but there's always learning tools. That's, I think, a sign of a good coach is helping players elevate from their errors and the ways that they have gone wrong in the past. So I'm sure that he'll be reinforcing the importance of, like, listen, guys, the easiest way to get beat is to beat yourselves.
Right. Well, that's the one thing he says. Bill Belichick has always been consistent. Most games are lost, not won. Let's not lose the game.
Yeah.
Let's let somebody else make the mistakes, and then we can walk out.
Exactly. They're the best at taking advantage of others' mistakes. So now he's going to say, listen, you're letting others take advantage of our mistakes.
Right.
Now. Right.
And that's the thing. And, I said that after the Super Bowl last year, and Patriot fans got all on me. I was like, well, that's Bill Belichick's motto. Right?
Yes, it is.
Most games are lost, not won. So I'm just telling you what your head coach, the philosophy of football he believes in. Field, as always, we appreciate you being with us.
Hey, everyone, Mike Golick here. Support for Mike and Mike podcast comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Mikes. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
I just saved hundreds of dollars by switching to Geico. I'm so happy, I feel like I can fly.
Disclaimer, you will not be able to fly by switching to Geico. This is against the laws of physics and nature. If you find yourself flying, please seek professional and or medical help immediately. In the unlikely event you find yourself flying, you might be a superhero, or a pigeon, or a superhero named Pidgewoman, who was bitten by a radioactive pigeon. If you are indeed Pidgewoman, Geico retains all licensing publishing rights in the event Pidgewoman the movie becomes a top-grossing Hollywood blockbuster.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Week 2, Golick and Wingo on ESPN Radio and ESPN2, presented by Progressive Insurance. All phone guests join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance line. Now, after we're done, Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz comes up on ESPN Radio. And obviously, it's been a rough year for a lot of reasons for the NFL.
Sure.
We've had the anthem protests. We've had some big hits, a lot of suspensions. And I think there's been 9 or 10 suspensions. Well, 9 now that the George Iloka suspension was reduced to a fine, but we've had a ton of suspensions in the year. We had the Mike Evans hit on Marshawn Lattimore in Week 9. We had the fight with Aqib Talib and Michael Crabtree. We had all kinds of stuff going on in the Monday night game between the Steelers and the Bengals. The Rob Gronkowski play last Sunday on Tre'Davious White. So there's been a lot of bad optics in the NFL. And Dan Le Batard on his show basically said that he thinks going back to 2006, and the reason I think he used 2006 was that was the year Commissioner Goodell sort of began his commissionership, or maybe he just took that out of
right
for whatever. He thinks that he doesn't see the NFL, if you listen to the sound, in a better place now than it was a few years ago.
Is the league better than it was 6 years ago? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
You don't think the league's in a better place 6 years from the day he took over?
No,
you don't think there's more revenues coming in?
The league is not in a better place today than it was 6 years ago. How can you argue that it's in a better place today? It was at the height of its power 6 years ago without the scandals, without the concussions, without the violence, without any of the issues. It was just money, glory, purity, without the anthem protests. I don't believe that you can argue that Roger Goodell deserves a pay raise based on him doing his job in a way that leaves the league better off than when he started doing it.
Well, that was 6 years ago. So he's talking about 6 years, not 2006. I'm sorry, I got that confused. But he's basically saying, is the league better off now than it was 6 years ago? And to his point, he didn't think it was because of all the things that are going on. Now, the point Stu Gatz was saying is the valid counterpoint to that is, yes, but look at all the money that the NFL is making and the revenue that the owners are bringing in.
A couple of things. First, I'm so tired of people worrying about what Roger Goodell made or person X made. Seriously, Dan? I mean, to say overpay, if somebody offered you $40 million a year, would you sign it? I mean, I'm amazed at, you want to be mad at anybody, go ahead and be mad at the owners for giving them the deal. But I mean, they worked out that deal and he signed it. I'm amazed at this. I was amazed at people complaining about, as I said, the basketball players you didn't know the name of that all of a sudden was making $14 million a year. So what? The money is there. The league can afford to pay those players that, and the players are getting it. The owners agreed to pay Roger Goodell all that money. So what? I mean, so what? The is he worth it or not argument is a ridiculous argument. You're worth what somebody is willing to take your signature for. So I just think that's a ridiculous argument. And as far as what the league is better or worse from 6 years ago, that's subjective. 6 years ago, the league made $8.5 billion. They made $14 billion last year. Better or worse?
Well, obviously, that's more money. Yeah.
So I guess it's all about what you're looking at. From scandals and PR and black eye to the public, it's absolutely not in as good a spot. Completely agree with Dan on that. So what are you looking at? The league financially is way better off than 6 years ago. Quite honestly, that may be the only thing the owners care about. And players, by the way, they make $8.5 billion to $14 billion. When you're splitting the pie the way you're splitting it, is more money to the players. So more revenue. Owners are happy. Players are happy. League to them is in a good place. From the public perception, as I said, Dan is right. With all the things that are going on, the game is going through the change with safety, and I get, so it's changing on the field, which is turning some people off away from some of the hits. Obviously, the anthem protest, and we've seen fights on a field before.
No question.
We've seen guys get thrown out before. Guys are getting thrown out at a higher rate now because they're cracking down more. So, yes, from the optics of how the league looks, 6 years ago, it's different. Some of the off-field issues that are going on, it looks different. So in that case, I agree with Dan. It's not as in good a spot PR-wise. Financially, you can't even make the comparison that it's not. It's way better, in way better shape than it was 6 years ago. So like a lot of things, it's how you look at it. What do you deem successful?
Right.
What do you deem better?
All right, so then that becomes the bigger question over the long play. What's the long play in terms of the NFL? Is it better because they're making more money, or is there concerns because of all the cracks we're seeing in some of the foundations?
Well, here's the long play as far that I see from the business standpoint is they made the 14 bill. Will that go down? Because ratings are down. Now, and we keep saying their ratings are down. All the other sports would even hope to have the down ratings of the NFL.
Absolutely.
So I get that. But you know what you don't look at? You don't look at that. You look at your own sport and you say, okay, we've had this. We've been used to it. We've got up to this amount of money. We've got up to this ratings. And now our ratings have gone down. Is our money going to go down? Well, we have to fix that. And they do. They have had some bad PR moves. There is no doubt about that. So a lot of it is what the public thinks of you, because they're the ones that are going to buy the tickets. They're the ones that are going to buy the merchandise. And maybe even more importantly, the advertisers, while are spending millions and millions, and TV networks are spending billions and billions on your product. If you put yourself in a position where an advertiser can come to you and say, you know what? Nah, the product's not what it was. Ratings are down. Next time we get to negotiate this, we're not giving you as much. And the next time TV deals are up, the networks can look at the league and say, you know what? Ratings are down. We can't give you as much. So from that aspect, because let's be honest, it all revolves back around money.
It does.
So that's what the NFL, they're going to have to see. There are a dip in ratings, no doubt about it. Is that going to have effect on the bottom line? You think it will. It's going to be a matter of how much and then what they need to do to try and get that back again, to work through the domestic violence and the punishments and what's going on, the kneeling for the anthem and the protests and the way the game is changing and the animosity toward the players and the league. There are definitely, and these aren't small things to overcome. These are not bigger things to overcome.
Well, Mark Cuban sort of touched on this. He's sort of weighed in talking about the NBA versus the NFL. He said, quote, our demographic is getting younger. The NFL and baseball, they keep getting older. And I think what we're doing with the video game, NBA 2K, is brilliant. And in the bigger scheme of things, in terms of building fans for the future, what do you want your kids to play? I mean, of all the sports out there, do you want to go to a baseball game? Do you want to watch your kid play basketball? Do you want to worry about him a whole football game, or do you want to watch your kid play basketball? So, I mean, that's sort of the way that Mark Cuban is sort of propping up his situation.
And his sport is flourishing right now. Let's be honest.
I think our ratings on the NBA are up 24 to 30%.
Let's be honest. All the sports, the major sports that we cover, if you want to include hockey, we've kind of put that out of the major four. But baseball, basketball, and football, Trey, they're flush with money, right? I mean, look at the contracts that are going on. Look at them, and now you hear some teams or whatever losing money. You look at it how you want it. Where are you losing it? Where are you gaining it? But they're all seem to be flush. The NBA, without question, is becoming way more popular. It's tons of money relative to, especially to the amount of players they have on the squad of 15, as opposed to 53, and then add another 10 with the practice squad. I mean, it's in a fantastic place now, and it is popular right now. And we'd be fools not to understand that video games are part of it. Madden, how popular is Madden and the NBA games? And these things are so popular right now. And he's right about the younger crowd. What do they say in the stadiums for baseball? The average, I think the average age was 56.
Right.
So, you do have to kind of try and bring it down. But I'll say again, as far as the league, certainly worse in some aspects, better in some aspects. It depends on which one you want to look at.
And again, what you think the long play is for the sport. Right. I will say this, people are talking about the ratings being down. I can promise you that the NFL is going to get more money in their next deal than they did in the last deal for a couple of reasons. One,
different avenues, right?
Yeah, there's competitor. If someone's going to drop it, someone's going to pick it up,
right?
Because that still is the surest bet on television. Mm-hmm. It is the surest bet on television.
You're still getting good ratings.
Is an NFL game, and the other thing is they have other rights to sell.
Yeah,
the digital streaming rights.
Right.
But they've been experimenting with Twitter and Amazon and Yahoo and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Someone's going to want to come in and say, give me that.
You're right.
As all we talk about all this other stuff, the dollar the next time around are still probably going to go up, and maybe by a significant margin for the NFL in their next negotiating right. Stefania, of course, on the Fantasy Focus podcast, answering the bell and Fantasy Football Now Sunday morning. So you see Stefania everywhere. Not only is she a great fantasy football expert, she's also a registered physical therapist, right, and our injury expert. And one of the things I always get that wrong, by the way, when I
all right. I answered pretty much anything, but physical therapist is the important part.
That was the most important thing. Mike and I have been talking about what Drew Brees said after the game. It's clearly because of the Thursday night games, and the data that we looked from our research actually doesn't show that. And you have some more data about the actual injury rate when it comes to Thursday night games.
Well, every year the NFL puts out a health and safety report, and for those who might be, might consider it suspect.
Skeptical.
Look, the data is compiled and then analyzed by an independent group, Quintiles. So they do all the data analysis. And when you're talking about the injury reporting, there's now an electronic medical record system, and they file the injuries through an electronic database. So injuries that are recorded, in other words, a player is injured on the field and then the medical staff files that injury officially, it is then analyzed. And essentially, over the last few years, they actually have a graph they publish of injury rates per game. And in the years that I've been following, and every year I get the report, their comparison specifically of Thursday night games to games played on other days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, shows that the injury rate is actually lower.
So on a Thursday.
On a Thursday compared to those other days. And that's been consistent every year. So while the players may feel a particular way about it, the numbers don't actually support.
So let me ask you this, because we want to get a question about Ryan Shazier and what's going on
yes.
there. But is there a cumulative effect? Could there be you play Sunday, you haven't fully recovered, you play Thursday, you may not get hurt, but is there something that could carry over even though it's now 10 days until your next
Sunday
game?
Or something?
That becomes the unanswered question,
right.
And that's something where that data hasn't been analyzed, and it's hard because it's multifactorial when you're talking about an extended period of time. So if we could look at that, and certainly when training perspective, you're talking about disrupting routine.
Right.
As you well know,
yes.
You have a routine Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You have less preparation from a technical standpoint, and maybe your body doesn't have the same recovery time, but the injury rate specifically is less on Thursday nights.
All right, Stefania Bell with us, and you alluded to it, Mike. We wanted to get to the updated news we had on Ryan Shazier, the news coming out yesterday that he had spinal stabilization surgery, and a lot of people have weighed in on what that means. And look, we understand that you have not worked with Ryan Shazier, you're not part of his medical team, but when people hear the word spinal stabilization, a lot of things go through their mind. What more light can you shed on what that potentially means?
It's very basic. When you have an injury to the spine that disrupts the stability of the spine, and that can either be the bony elements or the ligamentous structures that support the spine, and there's excessive motion at a particular segment or region of the spine, and you feel that threatens, the medical staff feels that this is something that will not heal on its own and potentially threatens the neurological structures, then you go in operatively and surgically stabilize it. Usually that involves inserting hardware because you are then trying to limit that excessive motion and protect the neurological structures so they can continue to heal as best they can.
So right now, is this just a waiting thing? I mean, players are used to waiting a bit and then boom, right back into rehab to get ready to go. Is this completely just wait?
And again, because we don't know what the injury was on the field, but presuming that there is still healing to occur, it can happen over days, weeks, and even months.
Yeah, look, Jennifer Ashton, who was a medical expert on Good Morning America, weighed in on this, saying this is done for two reasons. Number one, either someone's neurological condition due to the injury is deteriorating or unstable or getting worse, so that might be habit, or it might be done for a positive reason. The surgeons might feel that someone could recover faster, better, have a safer recovery if the area of that injury is stabilized. So all we're saying is, look, this is what happened. We're still not sure what it exactly means, and we don't want anyone to be making guesses.
Boy, I surely don't want to do that. So.
Yeah. I think the encouraging thing, he was transferred back to Pittsburgh, and they did it there.
Right.
They didn't do it emergently.
Yeah.
When he was taken to Cincinnati.
Right.
We've heard about his good spirits. I mean, I think there's positives to take away from it.
Stefania, thanks very much. We are up against the clock. Coming up next hour, Peter King joins us on the Factory of Sadness that is the Cleveland Browns. And did they get it right this time? Golick and Wingo, stay with us.